The desert takes the weak. My desert. My Iraqis. My Dune.
As I do every year, I feel like I'm obligated to do this video. I watched all 10 Best Picture nominees for the Academy Awards, and in this video I will rank and review them, starting from worst to best. Without wasting any more time, let's get right into it. Steven Spielberg's films haven't really been impressive for over a decade now, but I did at least expect him to make a little comeback, you know, at least be better than something like Ready Player One or Lincoln. But no, at least not for me personally. To be fair, West Side Story has its moments that capture the magic of musicals, and a few dramatic aspects worked sort of fine, but there just wasn't that much that impressed me within the mind-blowingly overlong runtime of 157 minutes. I watched the musical when I was younger and I already didn't love it. The songs aren't memorable, the characters are mostly underdeveloped, but even the parts that have nothing to do with the source material aren't all that good. Many praise this film for its visual look, and to be honest, yeah, it looks good at many moments. The first dance between Tony and Maria and some parts in the museum looked great. Generally though, I'd say that I did not love how this film was shot. The cinematography just feels weirdly clunky and uninteresting. The colors looked great, but there were a handful of shots that were almost like painful to look at. Especially scenes that took place outside were quite awful visually, in my opinion. There are some sequences where everything is just completely washed with ugly and unflattering yellow and orange colors. It seems like there was no effort put into really conceptualizing nice shots with great colors, but rather they just made everything colorful without a purpose, and it really isn't working together all that much. Spielberg's direction is awful at some points, to the point where a scene that is supposed to be the emotional climax seems hilarious. Some of the acting is the reason why I couldn't take it seriously. The cast isn't all that bad, but holy shit, Ansel Elgort's face is just so amusing, just like his awful singing. Allegations aside, his performance in this film is really bad. I never thought that he was a great actor, but I thought Spielberg could get something competent out of him, but no. The old score in this movie just sounds so incredibly dated and cheap as well. The final 40 minutes are good though. They go into a much darker direction and I really liked those parts. Ariana DeBose was pretty good, Rita Moreno stole every scene she's in, and Rachel Zegler brings one of the best debut performances that I've seen in quite a while. Sadly, at least 2/3 of the film were really boring, so yeah, at least there were some cool long takes, I guess. When AI finally takes over filmmaking, this type of film would be the first thing that we can artificially create. It is your typical Oscar bait biopic. Take a famous actor, put him in some makeup, cast him as a famous person with an inspiring story and play a little bit of sad music. Boom, there you have your Best Picture nomination. I mean, this isn't a bad film though. It's a film that actually tells a story that I would like to see represented more often on screen. Although, to be honest, I would have rather read a book about Serena and Venus Williams' father than seeing a film. Will Smith brings a pretty great performance. The child performances are pretty great too. Robert Elswith's cinematography looks pretty great, and for the most part, it's just mostly a pretty okay experience. It's nothing interesting or outstanding in any way though. Kenneth Branagh's semi-autobiographical historical drama seems to resonate with a lot of people, and it also resonated with me. I think it's a perfect example to show how much better it is to make a film that actually means something to you, rather than making a stupid cash grab. The only other films that I had seen of his were Murder on the Orient Express, Thor, and Artemis Fowl, which were not just immensely uninspired blockbusters, but they were one of the worst things that a film can be: boring. In this film, which is based on real events, Branagh clearly expressed a lot of trauma and emotional turmoil. It seemed like he actually cared about making the film, unlike a lot of his other work. It is quite an emotional ride, and I think it gets better as it goes along. Katrina Balfe and Kieran Hines stand out with their performances, and their characters work really well. It is really flawed though. I think one of my biggest issues with this film is the visual presentation. I heard that it had something to do with COVID, but man, it is kind of a shame that this film was shot digitally and not on film. It is a period piece drama about Brenna dealing with his childhood memories. The grainy, almost nostalgic look of shooting on film would have improved the visuals of this film tremendously. That's not my only issue with the visuals. I genuinely think that Haris Zambarlukas, or however you pronounce that name, is not that great of a cinematographer. The story is also incredibly underdeveloped, and I didn't really think it worked for a few parts. A pivotal moment in this movie, somewhat the dramatic climax of the story, featured Colin Morgan as the person who's the main antagonist of the film, and he was absolutely horrible and kind of ruined that scene for me. His performance wasn't good, but the script didn't really help him out either. I don't really like this any more than King Richard, but at least it's not that boring. I really don't have much to say about this one. This wasn't as bad as people made it look like. Don't Look Up is super divisive. It's almost a 50-50 split of people who either love it or hate it. I am in the middle, actually, leaning more towards positive. Yes, what Adam McKay said on Twitter about people not liking the movie because they don't understand it is stupid. Yes, the movie is obvious with its messages, and there wasn't a single thought put into how to tell the story subtly when writing the script. Yes, everybody acting like this is a great commentary on climate change is idiotic. But is it bad? If you don't view it from the perspective of, hey, this is kind of pretentious, then you realize that you might be able to enjoy it. It's pretty fucking entertaining in my opinion, even though it's corny. Other actors do a pretty great job, and in my opinion, it did enough to keep my interest throughout. If you really just take this film for the dumb comedy that it is, it works, especially since the talent attached to the film is great. I really liked the themes of The Power of the Dog. I especially loved the aspects of sexuality and toxic masculinity and power dynamics. That's the heart of the film in my opinion. Jane Campion's return is a very good drama that doesn't hold back from showing you every detailed psychological manipulation and to some extent even psychological abuse. Her screenplay is incredibly well written. I personally really loved how the story evolved. I actually would have liked more development. It is already pretty long, but I feel like there is more room to explore. I also thought that Benedict Cumberbatch's performance was really underwhelming for some reason. I think his character is very interesting, but Cumberbatch's portrayal of this very toxic and douchebag type character just doesn't work all the time. There are a lot of other things which don't really work all the time. The cinematography wasn't bad, but I never got the impression that it's anything special. I think the structure of the film could have used a bit more consistency. The font used in those short interludes that divide chapters looks super cheap. The tension wasn't necessarily present all the time where it needed to be, and I think the pacing is very weird at some parts too. So yeah. The Power of the Dog is a good film, but it suffers from a few aspects that were kind of mediocre. It seems to be the Academy's favorite, so let's just say I wouldn't want it to win, but it's not a bad pick at all. Nightmare Alley is pretty great. It's an interesting downward spiral of a tragedy, where we can see the rise and fall of a character. I love the character arc, and I really like how it all connects in the end. It also has a really haunting final scene. Bradley Cooper is pretty good at portraying that rather stoic protagonist in the beginning, and even better at being the very intense and insane anti-hero that the character turns into. The rest of the cast that accompanies Cooper is also really great, and everybody does their job. Del Toro also does his job really well as the director, with a great visual style consisting of great production design, interesting stylizations, reminding me a lot of old German expressionism films, and nice cinematography, although it is kind of repetitive after a while. The camera work felt like a Terrence Malick film for some reason, which is kind of weird. The only negative thing that I could really add here that's worth mentioning would be that it takes a long time to get going. I honestly wasn't feeling it for some time, and I felt quite bored for the first hour or so, possibly even the first 90 minutes. Once it really grabbed me though, I was on the edge of my seat. It has a very interesting way to build suspense and tension. It basically just increases with every minute until that final climax. So although I did not really feel like I got much out of the first half of this film, the second half made me realize that it was worth every second of sitting through it. So yeah. Coda, in many ways, is just kind of your typical indie coming-of-age drama, but there are a lot of things which elevate it from being just that. First of all, the cast is really great. Emilia Jones, Marley Matlin, Troy Kotsur, and Daniel Durant. So basically, the main family in this movie is just amazing. I'm very happy to see Kotsur getting a Best Supporting Actor nomination. The dude brought one of the best performances of the entire year. Director Sean Hayder also wrote the screenplay, and she clearly knew what she was doing. It isn't necessarily a masterful script by any means, but it is a narrative that properly conveys every emotion in the way that she wants it to be conveyed. Not just is the exploration of how it is to live without hearing much more interesting and well done than, for example, last year's Sound of Metal, but there are also a lot of great moments within the screenplay, just in terms of romance and dramatic scenes. It still falls into a lot of the same issues of the coming-of-age films like this have, though. The score is quite bad and manipulative, the cinematography for the most part is kind of bland, and the story is definitely pretty sappy. It is also very formulaic, predictable, and quite lacking anything particularly unique about it. Even though I like the way of showing how the main character is struggling, I also really felt like some of her struggles were sort of one-dimensional. It is nothing new, to be fair, but it does what it sets out to do really well, and that is trying to emotionally affect the viewer. And let's just say it, Paul Thomas Anderson did not fail to deliver. Yes, this film is much lighter and to some extent even more euphoric than a lot of his other, much more darker and erratic recent work like Phantom Thread, The Master, or if you want to, you could even go as far back as his true masterpiece, There Will Be Blood. However, all of those films share the same masterful directorial DNA in my opinion. If I were to describe Licorice Pizza with only referencing other PTA films, I'd say that it kind of is the love child of Phantom Thread and one of his earlier films, Punch Drunk Love. It has the brilliant, somewhat psychological back and forth between the two leads that is similar to his last film in the narrative, but there is stylistically and tonally so much of the magic that PTA already captured with Punch Drunk Love. The use of lighting in his films has never been this good since that film. No wonder PTA credited his lighting technician also for the cinematography. The camera moves a lot and doesn't necessarily capture every scene masterfully, but always in a way where you feel there is some sort of stylistic experimentation being put to the table. And obviously the entire energy of those characters screams Punch Drunk Love to me. It tonally reminded me a lot of another one of my favorite films of all time, which is Buffalo 66. I already used the word masterful, and I mean that's really the only way to describe this film. Everything is just on such a high quality level. A great Johnny Greenwood score accompanied by an amazing soundtrack, great cinematography, great production design, an awesome story that has so much content in it that it feels like an entire 400-page novel or like a 3-hour movie. This isn't a bad thing though, considering I enjoyed every second of it and it got better as it goes along. The Themes, particularly focusing on maturity and how one seeks validation, resonated a lot with me. The direction put so much tension and meaning into some insignificant scenes, at least on paper, which in other movies would have never been this good. The cast is just truly incredible. Alana Haim and Cooper Hoffman being first-time actors is just mind-blowing to me. They were so good. But also the stacked supporting cast with Sean Penn, the other two Haim sisters, and especially Tom Waits, who I already loved because of his music, and Bradley Cooper bringing excellent and fun performances. It also has fantastic pacing. There's just so much to love about this film. It's not even a top 3 PTA film, and it's still better than most directors' best movies. It's just on that level. If I had to say anything negative about this film, it would be that it took me around like 30 minutes to really get into it, and I guess the ending could have gotten a bit more added onto it. I also thought that the emotions weren't conveyed fully properly. I personally didn't have any problems with the controversial age gap in this film, considering the film is actually thematically about that and addressing that. But yeah, it's just such a special film, and I wish so many people wouldn't write it off immediately. This movie just felt significant, enormous. Dune is a gigantic film in every aspect. The scale of the entire story and setting, the runtime, the worms. My god, those worms are literally one of my favorite movie creatures already. The sound, the score, everything just felt colossal. Dune is a fucking masterpiece in every conceivable way. This is the only film on this list that I have seen twice, and I can confirm my love for it in that way. Every aspect, from the cinematography to the acting to the score to the writing to pretty much everything else, is on an unbelievable level of quality. Yes, there are films with better camera work, better acting, better scores, etc, etc. But there aren't many films that I can think of that have all of these elements combined quite like this film does. It's just a colossal work, not just in terms of scale and story, but also in quality. If there were one word to describe this film, then it would be this: goosebumps. Goosebumps is a word that defined this experience for me. I literally got goosebumps over a dozen times. My heart was beating violently fast at the end, and I was almost in shock, to the point where I was just sitting there completely in awe. And you know what's crazy? Dune Part 2 seems to be shaping up to be even better. Ain't that crazy? There isn't anything that I have a problem with in this film, except that it is only the beginning of something much larger. This film actually motivated me to read Frank Herbert's first 4 Dune novels up until God Emperor of Dune. And let's just say that this large story is my favorite sci-fi epic of all time, and God Emperor of Dune is my favorite piece of science fiction literature of all time. I don't think God Emperor will ever be adapted into film, but the second half of the first book will be enough to satisfy me. Denis Villeneuve proves once again that he's the best director working today. But there's one film that beat Dune for me, and that is... As dense as those 3 hours of runtime may be, I think how much I gathered from it just on this first watch means so much to me that I can honestly say that this is in my top 15 favorite films of all time now. Drive My Car is 179 minutes long, yet I never felt like there was any second wasted of it. It feels like individual chapters divided by music that have their own focus yet still connect to the main story. The closest film that I could compare it to would be Barry Lyndon. Obviously not in terms of look or story or tone, but in how it tells a long dialogue and narrative driven and detailed story. Yet every part feels incredibly necessary. It is a piece filled with many characters who all have different pasts and have dealt with the human experience in different ways. Every single person has a similar past and represents some sort of connection or parallel to the main character's story and history. It is hard to put into words, but there's really part of the protagonist within each separate side character that connects it all together in some way. I could write a character analysis for like 10 of these characters in this film. They all literally, metaphorically, or philosophically represent a piece of something that the main character lacks or needs or wants. Those parallels show how character A has lived through similar tragic events like character B, but they handled their situations so uniquely different that you can't really tell who has really made the better decisions. One has moved on from his past and found happiness, but in that sense lost a part of themselves, and another is still stuck in the past trying to find meaning without losing themselves. One has used the difficult past to make him stronger, the other it has made weaker. What I'm trying to say is that it explores the unique experience of each human being trying to come to grips with what happened to them in a way where you still end up with the same message. We're in the end all the same, and we need to accept what has happened to us in order to continue fighting. Hidetoshi Nishijima's portrayal of this incredibly complex main character might be my favorite performance of the entire year. Same with the screenplay. There's just so much to read into and so much to interpret in both the text and the acting. Every single line of dialogue or character quirk reveals something about the story or that character and their experience in their lives. I don't really know how much of the brilliance of the story and these characters can be attributed to Ryusuke Hamaguchi and how much of it stems from the original work by Haruki Murakami, but I think there can be praise given to both equally regardless. As somebody who has only read one Murakami novel, which is Hear the Wind Sing, I can say that I already know that he is a fantastic writer, but so is Hamaguchi because of how well he brought Murakami's writing style to the screen. Murakami's novels are very internal and told from a subjective perspective, so it is all the more impressive how Hamaguchi made it work and how he recreated that same feeling on film. Sure, you'll either love it to death or feel bored, but if you really give it the attention that it demands and focus on the parallels and the connections between the human beings in this film, you'll maybe get what I'm saying. Quite simply put, there really isn't anything on earth that compares to this truly unique, enchanting and personal piece of art. I didn't really feel like there were that many snubs. Most of my favorite films of the year were nominated for Best Picture, but there were 3 which I thought really deserved to be nominated. The first one being The French Dispatch. If you can get past the anthology structure, then this film is probably incredible to you. I mean, it's easily one of the best looking films of the year. Desplat's score is fitting and beautiful, the cast is amazing, and it's probably the best comedy I've seen all year. It might be the funniest Wes Anderson film to me. The Academy loves Wes Anderson and he does his usual shtick here, so I don't really get why he wasn't nominated. The second snub for me was Spencer. It only got Kristen Stewart a nomination, deservingly so, but there was so much more to this film. Claire Mathon's cold and isolated cinematography is absolutely breathtaking. I can't really put into words how gorgeously everything in this film is captured. From the precise framing to the stunning color palette to the atmospheric fog and environment. Every single aspect just works flawlessly. Pablo Larraín's direction is just amazing in this film. I guess it's just a little too artsy for the Academy. And the biggest snub to me was Joel Coen's The Tragedy of Macbeth though. I get why it was snubbed, because so many people just can't really handle Shakespeare dialogue and the English that is spoken in this film. I do, however, recommend his newest film to anybody who thinks they can get past the, what some might find very irritating, Elizabethan English that is spoken here, because once you do, you'll realize what a masterful film this is. The Tragedy of Macbeth is undeniably extraordinarily well crafted in every aspect, from the flawless editing with its mind-blowing transitions to the precise, beautiful and impeccable cinematography reminding me a lot of Bergman, the next level minimalist set design which is maximalist in scale and feel, and the haunting, immaculate score. Every single aspect of its presentation is unbelievably impressive. The original Shakespeare story is already perfect and the just plain fantastic cast does justice to the story. I mean, Denzel Washington should win the Oscar in my opinion. My jaw dropped multiple times just because I was shocked by how the film achieved such an insane level of quality filmmaking. I mean, I think that is it. If you're interested in my opinions on other categories besides Best Picture, then check out my Twitter, where I will be posting my picks and predictions very soon for other categories. And if you would like to see my next video, which might be far into the future, you could subscribe. Thank you for watching this, and goodbye, I guess.